This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Kush. In those days, when Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the fortified area of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and ministers of his kingdom. The army of Persia and Media was there. The nobles and governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When those days were completed, Ahasuerus gave for all the people in the fortified area of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains with blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen in purple to silver rings and marble columns. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by ordinance, without restraint, for the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace that each was to do as he desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who attended him to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her great beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. This the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. The king consulted the sages who knew the laws, for this was the king's procedure towards those who were versed in law and custom. And those who were next to him were Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 officials of Persia and Media who had access to the king and sat first in the kingdom. The king asked, according to the law, what should be done with Queen Vashti, because she has not followed the command of King Ahasuerus as conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said, in the presence of the king and the officials, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only to the king, but also to all the officials and to all the people in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will become known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands. For they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of contempt and wrath. Let a royal order come out from the king And let it be written in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Queen Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she is. Then, when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all of his kingdom, vast though it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the officials, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, declaring that every man should be master in his own house.
Sometime later, when King Ahasuerus was less angry and maybe sober, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he planned to do about her. His young male servants said to the king, "Let the king have a search for beautiful young women and bring them to the fortified area of Susa, to the women's house, to be under the care of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. And let the young woman who pleases you the most be crowned queen in place of Vashti." The king liked this idea and he instituted it. Now, there was a Jew who was in the fortified area of Susa, who lived there in the fortified area of Susa, whose name was Mordecai. He was the son of Jair and of the family line of Shimei and Kish. He was a Benjamite. Now, the Benjamites had been exiled from Jerusalem along with a group that included Judah's king, Jeconiah, whom Babylon's king, Nebuchadnezzar, had exiled to Babylon. Where was I? Oh, Mordecai. Mordecai had been a father to Hadassah, that is Esther, because she had neither father nor mother. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. So Esther and Mordecai were cousins. Mordecai had taken Esther as his daughter when her parents died. Now, Esther had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. When the king's order and new law became official, many beautiful young women came to the fortified area of Susa, to the women's house, to be under the care of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. Esther was also brought to the palace, where she was under the care of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. Now, Esther pleased Haggai and won his kindness. He quickly began her beauty treatments. He gave her specially chosen food. He gave her 7 servants chosen from the palace servants. And he gave Esther and her servants the nicest rooms in the women's house. Now, Esther had not told anyone of her race or family background because Mordecai told her not to. Each day found Mordecai pacing back and forth at the wall in front of the woman's house to find out how Esther was doing and what they were doing to her. Now, these are the rules for the women. The moment the young woman would go to the king came after 12 months. She received 6 months of beauty treatments with pleasant-smelling creams and 6 months of treatments with fragrant oils and other treatments for women. Then, in the evening, she would go to the king, to his bed, and the next morning, she would go to the second women's house, where she was under the care of, what's his name, Shezgez, the eunuch in charge of the secondary wives. And she would never see the king again unless she so pleased him that he called for her by name. Soon came the moment for Esther, Mordecai's cousin, to go to the king. Now, the other women were allowed to take anything that they wanted from the women's house with them to the palace. But Esther only asked for what Hagar told her to ask for. Esther went to King Ahasuerus on the 10th month, the month of Tevet, of the 7th year of his reign. Oh, the king loved Esther. He loved her more than any of the other women. She won his love and his favor more than any of the other women. He placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. He called for a magnificent royal feast, another feast, Feast of Esther, and he invited all of his officials and courtiers. He gave out royal gifts. He gave out gifts with royal generosity, and he also declared a what's it called, for all the provinces, where you have a holiday for all the provinces, which meant no taxes. Now, when the women were gathered at the second women's house, Mordecai was working for the king at the king's gate. Esther still had not told anyone of her race or family background because Mordecai told her not to. In fact, Esther continued to do everything that Mordecai said to do, just as she had when she was with him. Now, while Mordecai was working for the king at the king's gate, there were two royal eunuchs, Betham and Teresh, who became angry with the king. They were part of the group of royal eunuchs that were supposed to guard the king's doorway, but they secretly planned to kill him. Mordecai found out about the plot, and he told Queen Esther. And Esther told the king, and that Mordecai had told her about it. The matter was investigated and found to be true. The two eunuchs were impaled on pointed poles. And this entire event, the entire event, was written in the royal record with the king present.
After those things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. He advanced him and raised him above the others who were among him. And the king's guards at the king's gate bowed and did obeisance to Haman as commanded by the king. But Mordecai did not. The king's guards at the king's gate asked him, "Why do you not obey the king's command?" But Mordecai continued to ignore them day by day. And to see if this would stand, the king's guards went to Haman and said, "Mordecai is not obeying the king's command because he is a Jew." When Haman saw this, he became enraged. But it was beneath him to kill just one person. So he decided to kill all of Mordecai's people, for he had learned that Mordecai was a Jew, and he would kill them throughout the land. When this would take place, he discovered by the throw of the dice, the lot called the pur. And he went there on the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus' reign, and they threw the lot in front of him, and it fell on the 13th day of the last month, the month of Adar. Then he went to the king, and he said, "My sire, it has come to my attention that there are people scattered and separated among all your people who do not obey your commands. This should not be tolerated. They should be killed. And if it pleases you, I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the hand of your man of business to put into the king's treasury." And the king, he took the signet ring off his hand and put it into the hand of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And he said to him, "Take the money and the people and do what you think is good." So the king's secretaries were called, and they wrote an edict that would go to all the provinces in the kingdom, to the officials and the governors, each in their own script, and it was written under the name of King Ahasuerus, and it was sealed with the signet ring. And then the couriers were found to take the command to kill, annihilate, and destroy all the Jews on the last month, Adar, on the 13th day, young and old, women and children, and to take as plunder anything they wanted. Wow. A copy was made as a decree, and that was sent to the whole kingdom so that all the people would hear it and know what was to take place. When the decree was read in the fortified part of the city of Susa, the citadel, King Ahasuerus and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa fell into confusion.
When Mordecai learned what had happened, he tore his clothes. He dressed in mourning clothes and put ashes on his head. He then went out into the heart of the city and cried out loudly and bitterly. He went only as far as the king's gate, because it was against the law for anyone to pass through it wearing mourning clothes. At the same time, in every province and place throughout the king's, in every province and place where the king's new law had arrived, a very great sadness came over the Jews. They gave up eating and spent whole days crying out loudly in pain. Many Jews lay on the ground in mourning clothes and ashes. When Esther's female servants and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, the queen's whole body showed how upset she was. She sent everyday clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of mourning clothes, but he rejected them. So Esther sent for Hatach, one of the king's eunuchs whose job it was to wait on her. She sent him to Mordecai to find out what was happening and why he was acting this way. So Hatach went to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. He even spelled out the exact amount of silver that Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury. It was in exchange for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave Hatach a copy of the law made public in Susa concerning the Jews' destruction, so that Hatach could show it to Esther and report it to her. Through him, Mordecai ordered her to go to the king to seek his kindness and his help for her people. So Hatach returned to Esther and told her what Mordecai had said. In reply, Esther ordered Hatach to tell Mordecai. All the king's officials and the people in his provinces know that there's a single law in a case like this. Any man or woman who goes before the king in the inner courtyard without being called is to be put to death. Only the person to whom the king holds out the gold scepter may live. In my case, I haven't been called to come before the king for the past 30 days. When they told Mordecai Esther's words, he had them respond to Esther. Don't think for 1 minute that unlike all the other Jews in Susa, you'll come out of this alive simply because you're in the royal palace. In fact, if you don't speak out at this very important time, relief and rescue will appear for the Jews from another place, but you and your family will die. But who knows? Maybe it was for a time like this that you came to be part of the royal family. Esther sent this word back to Mordecai. Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. They aren't to eat or drink anything for 3 whole days. And I myself will do the same, along with my female servants. Then, even though it is against the law, I will go before the king. And if I am to die, then die I will. So Mordecai left where he was and did exactly what Esther had ordered him.
3 days later, Esther put on her royal clothing and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace, facing the palace itself. At that moment, the king was inside the palace, sitting on his royal throne. When he noticed Esther, he was pleased. He held out the gold scepter to her, and she came forward and touched its tip. Then the king said to her, "What is it, Esther? What do you want? I'll give you anything, even half the kingdom." Esther said, "If it pleases the king, please come today with Haman to a feast that I have prepared for him." The king said, "Hurry, get Haman so that we can do as Esther says." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. As they were sipping wine, the king said to her, "What is it, Esther? What do you want? I'll do anything for you, even give you half the kingdom." Esther said, "This is my wish. This is what I want. If I please the king, and if the king wishes to grant my wish and my desire, please come. I would like the king and Haman to come to another feast that I will prepare for them. Tomorrow, I will answer the king's questions." Haman left Esther's place that day in a happy mood, his spirits high. But then he saw Mordecai sitting at the king's gate.
Mordecai neither stood nor acted the least bit nervous around him, so that Haman became enraged with Mordecai. But he held himself back and went home. He sent word that his wife Zeresh and his friends should join him there. Haman boasted about his great wealth and his many sons, and how the king had honored him by promoting him above the officers and high royal workers. Best of all, he said, Queen Esther has invited only me to join the king for food and drinks that she will prepare. In fact, I have been asked to come to her place tomorrow. But all of this loses all meaning every time I see Mordecai, the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then Zeresh and all of his friends said to him, have the people prepare a pointed pole, 75 feet high. In the morning, tell the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then you can go to the feast in a happy mood. Haman liked that idea and had the pole prepared.
On that night, the king couldn't sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of records, the annals, and they were read to the king. It was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold of the palace and who had conspired to kill King Ahasuerus. The king said, well, what honor or distinction has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this? His servant said, nothing has been done for him. The king said, who's in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai impaled upon the pole which he had prepared. The king's attendants who served him said, Haman is there, standing in the outer court. The king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor? Haman thought to himself, who would the king wish to honor more than me? So he said, for the man whom the king wishes to honor, let the royal robes be brought which the king has worn, and the horse which the king has ridden, with the royal crown on its head. And let the robes and the horse be handed to one of the king's most noble officials. And let him robe the man whom the king wishes to honor, and lead him on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor. The king said, quickly, take the horse and the robes, and do so to Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate, and leave out nothing that you have mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he robed Mordecai, and he led him through the open square of the city on horseback, proclaiming before him, thus shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor. Now Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman went home, mourning with his head covered. And when he had told all that had happened to his wife Zeresh and to all his friends, they said to him, if Mordecai, before whom your fortunes have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, then you will not prevail and will surely fall. While they were still speaking, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman off to the banquet that Esther had prepared.
So the king and Haman went to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be fulfilled. And what is your request? Even to half my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "Well, if I have found your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me. That is my request. And the lives of my people. That is my petition. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as men and women, slaves, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he who has presumed to do this?" Then Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king rose from the feast in wrath and went to the palace garden. But Haman stayed behind to beg his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that the king had determined to destroy him. When the king returned to the palace garden, from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman had thrown himself on the couch where Esther was reclining. And the king said, "Will he even violate the queen in my presence, in my own house?" As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Look, the pointed pole that Haman has prepared for Mordecai stands at Haman's house, 75 feet high." And the king said, "Impale him on that." So they impaled Haman on the very pole he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the anger of the king abated.
That same day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther what Haman, the enemy of the Jews, owned. Mordecai himself came before the king because Esther had told the king that he was family to her. The king took off his royal signet ring, the one he had removed from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Then Esther put Mordecai in charge of what Haman had owned. Now Esther again spoke before the king. She bowed at his feet and wept and begged him to treat her kindly. She wanted him to overturn the evil plot of Haman the Agagite, his plan directed against the Jews. The king held out the gold scepter to Esther. And she got up and stood before him. She said, "If the king wishes, and if I please him, that is, if the idea seems right to the king, and if he still sees me as a good person, then have people write something to call back the order that put into effect the plan of Haman, Hammedatha the Agagite's son, that he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the royal provinces. How can I bear to watch the terrible evil that is about to sweep over my people? And how could I bear to watch others destroy my own family? Well, King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, look, I've given Esther everything that Haman owned, and Haman himself, my servants have impaled on the pole because he planned to attack the Jews. So, you yourselves write to the Jews, whatever you like, in the name of the king, and seal the letters with the king's royal ring. Whatever is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's royal ring cannot be called back. So, that is when the royal scribes were summoned on the 23rd day of the 3rd month. That is the month of Sivan. They wrote exactly what Mordecai ordered to the Jews, the rulers, the governors, and officials of the provinces from India to Kush, 127 in all. They wrote in the alphabet of each province and in the language of each people. They wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and they sealed the order with the king's royal ring. He sent letters with riders mounted on royal horses, bred from mares known to run fast. The order allowed Jews in each town to join together and defend their lives. The Jews were free to wipe out, kill, and destroy every army and any people of any province that attacked them, along with their women and children. They could also take and keep anything their attackers owned. The one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus on which they could do so was the 13th day of the 12th month. That is the month of Adar. A copy of the writing was to become law in each province and be on public display for all its peoples to read. The Jews were to be ready on this day to get back at their enemies. The riders mounted on royal horses left Susa spurred on by the king's order, and the law became public in the fortified part of Susa. Now Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in a blue and white royal robe, wearing a large gold crown and a purple and white coat. The city of Susa greeted him with shouts of joy. For the Jews, it was a day of light, happiness, joy, and honor. In every city, in every town, wherever the king's law and his order arrived, for the Jews, it was a day of happiness and joy. For them, it meant feasts and a holiday. Many people in the land became Jews themselves out of fear of the Jews.
It was on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, that the king's order and his law were to be enforced. On the same day, the very day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the tables were turned against them. The Jews overpowered their enemies. They joined together in their towns in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, defending themselves against those who were trying to harm them. No one was able to stand in the way of the Jews because they were afraid of them. The leaders of the provinces, of the rulers, the governors, and those who were in charge of the king's business helped the Jews because they were afraid of Mordecai. Because Mordecai had become important in the palace, news of him was spreading throughout all the provinces. Indeed, Mordecai was becoming more and more important every day. Now, the Jews put down their enemies with sword blows, killing, and destruction. They did whatever they wanted to those who hated them. In the fortified part of Susa, the Jews killed 500 people. And they also killed Pashandata, Dolphin, Aspada, Porada, Adalia, Aridata, Pamashta, Arasai, Aradai, and Vezata. 1, 3, 4, 5, 10. 10 sons of Haman. They killed the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But the Jews, even though they were allowed, they did not lay their hands on anything that their enemies owned. Now, on this same day, a report concerning the number of people killed in the fortified part of Susa reached the king. And King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, the Jews in the fortified part of Susa have killed 500 people, including the 10 sons of Haman. But what has been done in the other royal provinces? What is it that you wish? I will give it to you. What is it that you desire? I will do it this time too. And the queen responded, if the king desires. Let the Jews in Susa also have tomorrow to do what the law allowed today. And let them impale the 10 sons of Haman on pointed rods. The king sent this order out, and it became public law in Susa. And the sons of Haman were impaled on rods, just as the queen had said. Now, the Jews in Susa joined together again, this time on the 14th day of the month of Adar, killing another 300 people. But still, they didn't lay hands on any of their possessions of their enemies. Now, the Jews in the other royal provinces also came together to defend their lives. These Jews just put to rest the problems they were having with their enemies
and they killed those who hated them. The count? 75,000 were killed. And yet, not a hand was laid on any of the possessions of the dead people. It was the 13th day of the month of Adar that these Jews acted. Now, on the 14th day, they rested. And it had become a day of joy and feasting. Now, you remember the Jews in the fortified part of Susa acted on the 13th and 14th days. So on the 15th day, they rested. Again, making it a day of feasting, joyous events, celebrated. That is why Jews who live in villages on the 14th day of the month of Adar feast, celebrate, have joyous events, a holiday. And it is on this day that they send gifts of food to each other.
Now, Mordecai recorded all these events, and he sent letters out to all the Jews in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. So, this was celebrated as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies. It was a month when they had their sorrow turned to joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing exactly what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the poor, that is, a lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot of the king's enemies, when the plot came to the king's attention of what the enemies of the Jews were going to be doing, the plot that Haman had devised against them, it turned out that that scheme was turned against Haman, and that he and his sons instead would be impaled on those poles. And therefore, these days of celebration are called Purim, from the word poor, because of everything that was written in that letter, and because of what they themselves had seen and what had happened to them. The Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and everyone who was part of them should without fail observe these 2 days annually in the way that was prescribed in the letter. Now, these days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every people, in every family, in every province, and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by Jews, nor should the memory be able to die out among their descendants.
Queen Esther.
daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with her full royal power to show that this second letter about Purim was correct. Letters conveying good wishes and words of friendship were sent to the 127 provinces in the kingdom of Ahasuerus. Their aim was to make sure that these days of Purim were kept according to the rule of Mordecai and Esther. This rule fit well with what they themselves were doing and what they had agreed to keep forever, along with additional practices like lamenting and fasting. By Queen Esther's order, these features of Purim became part of the law, and so they were written down. King Ahasuerus taxed the entire kingdom, including the islands of the Mediterranean. Now, some may want to know all about the king's great and mighty deeds. They may also want to know the full report of how important Mordecai became after the king honored him. Are they not included in the full recording of all the kings of Media and Persia? Certainly, Mordecai was second only to the king in terms of importance. He was also thought highly of by all the Jews, and his many brothers and sisters were proud of him. Mordecai always tried to do good things for his Jewish people, and he spoke up whenever any in his family needed help.